Picture this, a woman standing completely alone in a vast open field. She's cutting grain, just going about her day, singing this haunting melody to herself in a language that no one else around her even understands. A traveler walks past, stops, listens for a bit, and then just keeps walking. Believe it or not, that is the entire plot of one of the most celebrated poems in all of English literature. Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into William Wordsworth's masterpiece, The Solitary Reaper. We've got no epic battles here, no sweeping romances, and zero villains. Just a simple song, a stranger passing by, and a memory that lasts a lifetime.
So let's kick things off with a pretty simple question. Did Wordsworth actually see the solitary reaper? Well, the surprising answer is nope. He actually never witnessed this scene in real life. Even though he composed the poem in 1805, the real spark for it came from a manuscript written by a buddy of his, Thomas Wilkinson. It was a travel journal called Tours to the British Mountains. Wilkinson literally just wrote a single brief sentence about passing a Highland girl who was reaping and singing all by herself in a field. Wordsworth took that one second-hand fragment, borrowed it, and basically just let his incredible imagination take the wheel.
And this perfectly illustrates his entire philosophy of what poetry actually is. In the preface to his famous work, Lyrical Ballads, Wordsworth defined poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, recollected in tranquility. Think about that for a second. He didn't feel the need to be standing right there in the field, furiously taking notes like a reporter. This poem is a perfect miniature of his whole method. He took an imaginative spark, maybe colored a bit by his own past walking tours of Scotland with his sister, Dorothy, and shaped it calmly through memory into a total masterpiece, long after the fact.
Okay, here is our game plan for today. First, we'll look at the architect and the era. Then, we'll take a walk right through the poem. After that, we'll dive into the hidden depths. And finally, we'll wrap up with an exam revision capsule to make sure you're ready to ace your tests.
Let's jump right into part one, the architect and the era, focusing on Wordsworth and Romanticism. To really get this poem, we have to understand the man behind it. Born in 1770 in England's rugged Lake District, Wordsworth lost his parents at a young age, so nature essentially became his substitute teacher. Fast forward to around 1789. As a young man, he travels to France and gets totally swept up in the French Revolution and all its promises of liberty. But watching that promise collapse into absolute violence deeply, deeply disillusioned him. And what's truly fascinating here is how that profound disappointment completely shifted his artistic focus. It pushed him away from grand, epic political themes, and instead, he started looking for deep human truths in ordinary people, everyday language, and the natural world. This massive shift ultimately led to the publication of Lyrical Ballads in 1798 alongside Samuel Taylor Coleridge, which really cemented his role as a central figure of the so-called Lake Poets. Now, that 1798 publication basically launched the entire Romantic period in English literature. And the crucial point for us is understanding exactly what Romanticism is. Think of this movement as a massive rebellion. It was a direct reaction against the cold, calculating reason of the Enlightenment and the grimy industrial ugliness of the time. If you ever get asked on an exam why The Solitary Reaper is a romantic poem, and trust me, you probably will, this is your cheat sheet. You absolutely have to mention its focus on nature as a spiritual force, how it prioritizes imagination and emotion over strict reason, and its radical elevation of ordinary humanity. Taking someone like an anonymous peasant girl in a field and making her entirely worthy of being poetic subject, that was a total game changer.
Moving right along to part two, let's take a walk through the poem, stanza by stanza. The story kicks off in stanza 1. Our traveler discovers a lone woman out in the remote, rural Scottish Highlands. She's single in the field, cutting grain with a sickle and binding it up into sheaves. And as she's working, she's singing this incredibly sad, haunting melody in Scots Gaelic. The speaker is so struck by this moment that he actually turns to us, the readers, and invites us in, saying, "Behold her." He tells us we basically have two choices: either stand still and really listen, or gently tiptoe past so we don't ruin the magic. Her mysterious voice is literally overflowing the entire quiet valley.
As we move into stanza 2, the speaker is scrambling for a comparison big enough to capture such intense beauty. He looks to a nightingale singing to exhausted travelers in the scorching Arabian desert, and then immediately contrasts that with a cuckoo bird calling out in the freezing, remote islands of the Hebrides. In a single breath, Wordsworth is stretching his imagery to the absolute extremes of the earth. He's taking two of the most treasured, heavy-hitting bird symbols in English literary tradition just to prove to us that this anonymous peasant girl's voice totally outshines them both. It is just such a beautifully, deeply romantic gesture.
But that begs the obvious question, right? What on earth is she actually singing about? Well, stanza 3 is where we hit the emotional turning point of the poem. The speaker realizes he can't translate a single word of her Gaelic. He is left completely in the dark, entirely forced to guess. He wonders, is her song about legendary ancient battles? Old, unhappy, far-off things? Or is it just a familiar, everyday kind of grief? A sorrow that has been and may be again. That lingering mystery isn't a flaw. It's actually the very core of the experience.
And in stanza 4, that mystery is left completely and beautifully unresolved. The speaker stops trying to decode her song into some concrete meaning, and instead he just surrenders to the music. He listens as if the song could literally go on forever. He stands there totally motionless, fully absorbed in the moment. Then, eventually, he turns and walks away up the hill. But here is the crucial part. The physical moment ends, sure, but the emotional and imaginative moment absolutely does not. He carries that resonance, that music in his heart, long, long after the actual sound faded away.
All right, section 3, the hidden depths. Let's dig into the symbolism and meaning behind all of this. Let's decode the essential symbols here, because it's kind of like a giant puzzle. First, the solitary figure herself represents this sort of sacred isolation. The sickle in her hand and the way her body is bending over the crops grounds the whole poem in real, gritty physical labor. She's a working-class woman in the real world. Then you have a nightingale and the cuckoo, which represent that grand, inherited literary tradition that her raw, natural voice just effortlessly surpasses. And finally, the music in the heart is the literal embodiment of memory. But I want you to pay special attention to that untranslated song. Because her exact words are completely unknowable to the speaker, her song transforms into something much bigger, an expression of pure, unmediated feeling. It's Wordsworth proving that music and raw emotion can communicate on a profound level, way beyond the strict limits of spoken language.
Now, if you're looking to score top marks in your literary analysis, you should absolutely bring in this critical angle, the unknowability of the other. Think really critically about the English traveler's relationship to this Gaelic Highland culture. Because he can't access her actual language or her inner life, he's just projecting his own romanticized guesses onto her song. From a post-colonial perspective, it forces us to ask a tough question. Does the poem serve as a genuine tribute to her voice, or does it quietly use her as this exotic symbol without ever actually letting her speak for herself? Exploring that tension right there, that is exactly what makes for a fantastic, high-level essay.
But honestly, the magic of this poem isn't just in the words themselves, it's baked right into the structure. Wordsworth gives us 4 tight stanzas of 8 lines each. He uses a ballad-like meter, mostly an iambic tetrameter, and sticks to a relatively straightforward rhyme scheme. Do you see how the form is reinforcing the content here? This simple, rhythmic structure perfectly mirrors the humble, rustic song that the Reaper herself might actually be singing. Wordsworth achieves this incredible emotional depth entirely through structural simplicity. The poem is literally performing its own subject matter.
And that brings us to section 4, our exam revision capsule. Let's get you prepped.
All right, let's distill this down to the critical facts you absolutely need to memorize. The poem was composed in 1805 by William Wordsworth. Remember, he wasn't inspired by first-hand experience, but rather by a sentence in Thomas Wilkinson's travel manuscript. The setting is the remote Scottish Highlands, and the overarching key theme is the ordinary made sublime. This is your quintessential romantic poem. It elevates rural, everyday labor and proves that memory is poetry's truest subject. Above all else, it is the perfect living example of his core philosophy, emotion recollected in tranquility. Keep those key points handy.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to really chew on. If poetry truly is emotion recollected in tranquility, what fleeting everyday moments are you failing to capture in your own memory? In just 32 short lines, Wordsworth gives us the entire romantic worldview in miniature. He proves that a solitary, seemingly insignificant moment in a field can last forever. It really leaves us to wonder what quiet brilliance we might be walking past every single day, just because we're too busy to stop, listen, and let the music sink into our hearts. So next time you're out and about, remember the Solitary Reaper. Good luck with your exams, and thanks for joining us today.